Hi there, this is Linda Banfalvey. Welcome to my studio. So today I am going to show you how I'm painting with fluid acrylics on watercolor paper. And for this demonstration, you might have seen this on my YouTube in a time lapse very quickly so you can see how I construct the whole painting like magic. This is going to be slowed down a little bit. It's still a little faster than normal speed, but you'll be able to see the process. I am painting tulips in a vase. I wanted it to be energetic, and I'm working quickly with very wet media onto dry paper. And I'm using a rubber brayer. It's a printmaking tool that I use with oil paint as well as with acrylics. It's a fun way to apply paint quickly, and then I move it around using just tap water in a spritzer bottle. I'm softening some edges here. I'm applying it first with my roller, and then I'm softening and moving the paint around using water. This is a water media technique, painting with acrylics on paper. So it's similar to watercolor, except the pigment is in an acrylic binder. So when it dries, it's not resoluble in water. It will be permanent. What I like about that is that the layers that I paint don't get muddy. They don't get workable and mix in with the next color. I am working wet and wet for quite a bit of this painting, which allows the colors to mingle before the layers are dry. I started with some cool colors, some phthalo blue, I believe, or indanthrone blue. I can't remember exactly which one I used. Nice transparent, cool colors. Then I've added some green gold, which is also a transparent color in acrylics. I'm using lots of water, which adds to the transparency, just to warm the coolness. I have alternating from warm to cool, and still working with this concept of creating energy and movement. I tip the paper up to let gravity help me out a little bit with the movement of the pigments while everything's quite wet. Now I'm adding some more colors to indicate the shapes of the actual tulip flowers. And I'm using a silicone paintbrush, which is a nice way to add paint without the paint actually getting lost into the bristles. I pick up the paint and then I apply it directly to my paper. And I find that you can using the fluid acrylics, it is adding thicker fluid acrylic on top of a thinner wash. So it tends to stay where you put it a little bit better. I want some areas that have harder edges, and then I lose the edge when you see me spritzing with water. You'll notice that I'm working the whole watercolor paper all at once. I'm not developing one area and finishing it. I'm starting off loosely, very abstract shapes, connecting my edges with the loose wash, and as I proceed, I will work with less water and more paint on my scraper tools. At this point, I'm just working with balancing my design and building up my layers and mark making. I introduced another warm color, which I believe is quinacridone azo gold. It's a beautiful transparent pigment as well. And when it mixes in with the blue that I have already on my paper, I'm getting some nice greens into that background wash. I'm playing with some line work and mark making while I'm letting the pigments soak into the paper and some evaporation to start to happen. So I'm constantly being aware of how wet things are on my paper. And you'll notice that there's some areas of the paper that are completely dry that I haven't spritzed water on. I use those dry areas to develop a bridge or a dam or an area that stops the pigment from flowing into that area. So wherever you have water, pigment will flow, and wherever the paper is dry, it will stop the pigment from flowing there until you move it with a brush or with some more water. So things are still pretty wet. I'm working in the negative space right now. Introduced a new color, some dioxazine violet. I like the way it mixes in with the green gold and creates some neutral areas while wet and wet. And when I add it into the blue wash, you're seeing me here make marks indicating the idea of flower stems in a vase. So I'm making some line work, and the purple is nice as a dark value, nice contrast against the white of the paper. I like the white of the paper to conserve a lot of that as I develop the painting, so I can decide what will remain as maybe part of the design element in the finished painting, or what areas need to be softened out or glazed with a different color. So it allows me that option later in the painting process. But right now I'm working in the bottom half of the painting, connecting my edges. Now I'm moving up to the upper right quadrant and adding in some dark onto the dry paper. There's a little water that I had spritzed at the top, and now I'm letting it flow together. So I have a variation of light, dark, and mid-tones. And now I'm just dripping some of that off the paper or connecting it down into some of the other shapes. Still very loose and abstract. It's a really fun way to work, and allowing your intuition to decide what marks you make and how you connect your shapes. So I'm just working around. Right now I was working counterclockwise, but it doesn't really matter. It's just whatever my intuition tells me what to do next. But I'm trying to get the whole image at the same level of completeness, making sure that I keep things loose. It's easy to loosen up when you use a lot of water, but you have to be careful how much water you use. And I have a rag that I use to lift up some of the pools of water that's just a little too much. And this comes with getting used to working with water media and how much water to actually use. You'll see me using these scrapers that are made with silicone. There's various types that I use. And at this point, because everything really is very wet, I'm just using the pure paint, picking it up on my tool. And then I'm applying it directly to the tulip shapes. And then I'm using a watercolor brush. I think it's about a 1-inch brush. Then I'm softening some of the edges. I'm applying the paint and then I'm softening the edge a bit so it's on some areas. That shape on the outside edge, I didn't want it to be too important. And the shape next to it, I have a hard edge there against warm against cool, and I'm setting up those flower shapes. Some of the under layers by this point are starting to stain the paper and set up, and so when I lift some puddles of water with my cloth, I'm not lifting up the color because it's already starting to set into the paper. And I'm working in my boat studio here, so it's a warm day. I'm in shorts and bare feet and splashing the water around, and things are drying a little bit as I go. So it depends on your environment that you're in, if it's a humid environment or hot, breezy, as to how fast your paints will dry. I have a sponge beside my palette where I'm blotting my brush periodically because I pick up some water with the brush as well off the painting and then blot it in between colors. Now I'm adding this red, naphtha red light is the color that I'm adding on top of the quinacridone gold or nickel azo gold. And I find that I love that combination of color, and notice how I'm not getting rid of all of the gold color. I'm just adding the new red because they were red tulips that I was working from. But I like the combination of the red and the yellow. So it's an optical mixing of colors. It gives me a nice glow of these pigments on the paper. So I'm just playing with those shapes right now in this layer of the painting. Meanwhile, the rest of the painting is starting to set up and dry, especially the ones that are thinner, that are painted thinly. I don't know what I'd do without a rag. I use rags or cloths with, it doesn't matter what medium I'm working with. I use them also with my oils and cold wax medium. It doesn't really matter. They're useful for softening edges, moving paint, lifting paint. When I work with the acrylics, I don't usually work with gloves because I'm not working with the cadmiums and cobalts and like the heavy metal pigments. And it's fairly easy to wipe my hands after. Now, if I were using those pigments, I would wear gloves for sure. I try to use pigments that are non-toxic when I'm splashing paint around like this for sure. In oils, I do as well. Sometimes I will use some of the cobalts or cadmiums, but I'm very careful how I handle that so I don't absorb anything in through my skin. Safety first. So I spend a little bit more time with developing the shapes of these tulips. And I actually had a vase of them that I don't show in the video, but there was a vase of tulips that was behind me on the boat because I had a bunch of artists come and visit me. This was a few years back. I had maybe half a dozen or so artists come and visit me on my boat, and they brought me tulips. And I was showing them how I set up my paints and where I worked while I was traveling on the boat. So that was really nice of them. And I thought, I just felt like painting flowers. Sometimes when I'm traveling on the boat, I'm painting a lot of water scenes, sometimes boats, things that I see around me, marshes. And I love painting florals, so I have to get my floral fix in. And a bouquet of flowers is always the perfect excuse for that. There's something about how loose I can paint with flowers, as well as the color combinations. They allow your creativity to add colors that aren't necessarily there, but colors that you like the combination of. Now, at this point, I am wetting the whites of the paper with clear water and my watercolor brush. And I did take a break. At this point, I stopped painting and let the painting dry, and I came back to it the second day. And so now what I'm doing, I am wetting the whites of the paper so that I can do a soft, warm glow. Oh, I'm doing a little bit of I think it's Indian yellow. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Indian yellow is a little bit brighter than the quinacridone gold. I'm doing a bit of a glaze wash over the purple, over the white, to create the effect of light coming through the bouquet and through the vase. I love that kind of look. Adding some warmth in there and some pure colors because everything's dry. So I can glaze over top of the blue with the yellow and get some different variations of green. And it creates a little color vibration set up next to the purples. Yellow and purple are complementary colors, so there's a bit of a vibration there. Because everything's dry, I'm not mixing everything into there, so I put it on a little bright and then I lift it off. I adjust the intensity of that yellow. So it's up to you as to whether you make it really bright or soft. It depends on the feeling you're trying to create. And you can put it on softly and then add more yellow or more intensity later if you decide it's not quite to the level of intensity that you like. So here, because the whites are wet, I put the color in strong and then I soften it out with the brush, lift some of it off, and then it's on my brush and I move it over to another area. And then when the painting's dry, it might just dry a little bit not intense enough that I can go in and do it again to modify the intensity. So it's like watercolor in that respect. The only thing is, if you put it on really strong, you're not able to lift it back out once it's dry like you can with watercolor. So if you start off a little softer and then build your intensity once it's dry, it's probably safer maybe if you don't know what's going to happen. If you put it on too strong, you can go over top if you use an opaque to soften it down. There's always ways to continue, but I'm trying to retain the transparencies while I'm painting this image. There's transparent areas and then there's some areas that are more translucent. And the pure thick paint areas of the tulips are actually opaque because you can't see through that layer where I've applied the paint thickly. So it's nice to balance all of those elements in the painting so that it's not just in one part of the painting, and to make it work as an abstract design. No matter how representational you end up painting the painting, I'm always looking at the overall abstract design of an image to try to see what I can do to strengthen that and make it more interesting. So this is a fun process where I can just get into my own space, and I know everything's dry. The 95% of the painting is dry and finished. And So now I can do the glazing and the creating the glow, or if I've lost some of the glow, put it back in. And I find this part of the painting quite relaxing. And I just work one area, move on, and then decide how things are going as I paint. And you'll notice that yellow glow connects from the top of the painting through to the bottom, and then I've got it off to connecting to each side of the painting as well. And I try to work with that balancing dynamic as well. And it helps to stand back from the painting and step away for a bit. Sometimes when you're looking a lot, you don't see things as well. It's good to spend the time and decide. So now I'm wetting the painting in that upper right quadrant because that was all dry, and I'm going to push it into a darker value over top of the purple with indanthrone blue. I'm pretty sure that's what I've used here. It's a beautiful transparent color, and I just love how it makes that flower pop forward. And I'm pushing the value of that negative space darker. And I'm just bringing it down into in between the flowers a bit, just to pull that shape, creating that edge to show that's the background behind those flowers. A little softening the edge there with the rag, lifting back the yellow that I had put in there. And then wetting another area, and then dropping in that cool blue background with my watercolor brush. And this is, I think, about a 1.5 or 2 inch brush. It's a nice big flat, holds a lot of pigment and water. I don't use brushes much with my oil and cold wax, but with water media, I love to use these big flats. So I'm again moistening that corner, popping in the dark to push that flower shape forward. And when you pre-wet the area that was dry, you're allowing time to come in and soften the edge so you have nice soft edges, so you don't have these big hard edges. You have time to consider what to do there, but not too much, because once acrylic dries pretty quickly, but it gives me a little bit more time by wetting the shape first. And then I don't tape my paper down when I paint with acrylics on watercolor paper, because I like to lift a corner, move it around to use gravity, especially at the beginning. So sometimes wet pigment or water gets over the edge, and I'll lift and wipe around. You'll see me do that periodically with a rag. I'll lift up the extra water so it doesn't go flooding back onto the paper, because that will start to create, if you let the stuff on your painting board creep back onto the painting, it could create some bloom effects that you may not want. And it just helps me control the wetness of the edges of my paper. I do it fairly frequently through the process, and I know that a lot of that has been cut out on editing the painting process. So you'll see me once in a while, but usually that's been cut out. So I just wanted you to know that I do that a lot when I paint with the water media. And when I'm painting on oil paper with my oil and cold wax, I tape that paper down because I'm not using wet media and it stays nice and flat. But the reason why I tape it is because I don't want oil paint to go underneath my paper. And I don't want my oil paper to be moving around, as sometimes I will mount my paintings done on oil paper to boards, so I don't want it to be oily underneath. But with watercolor paper, if it dries, say I want to mount this to a cradle wood panel, I still can do that because there's nothing like oils that are going to repel my glue. So this could be framed underneath glass like a traditional watercolor paper painting would be framed, or it could be mounted onto a cradled wood panel and then varnished, and it would look like I painted the painting directly on panel. But there's something magical about painting on paper, no matter what medium you use. And so I'm just working around the painting into that negative spaces, working on my edges and how the negative space interacts with the positive shapes like the flowers and the and lifting that corner to move the paint so gravity helps to move, and then I'm blotting up some of the excess water there. I painted a lot of acrylic on watercolor paper paintings when I travel because it dries so nice and fast. Acrylics dry fast, and then I could store it in my big black case that I have for finished paintings, and it's just so much more compact than painting on big panels. When I'm on a boat, I don't have the space to store all these paintings, and this is a 30-inch painting. It's 30 inches high by 22 inches wide. It's a full sheet of watercolor paper. Minimum 140-pound cotton rag paper, and sometimes I'm working on a 200-pound. I like the Saunders Waterford 200-pound paper too. And this is, I think this might be a Winsor & Newton 140. Very good quality watercolor paper will give you a better quality finished painting. You'll just have a lot more success with how the paint flows as opposed to using cheap paper. I've always tried to use, even when I first started painting, which was 35 years ago almost, I've always tried to use the best quality that I could afford. Artist quality paper, artist quality pigments and paint for their light fastness, and you'll just get such a better result with your finished painting and a lot less frustration than using the student grade stuff. Like, this is just flowing like magic on there. It's not difficult for me to paint. I wet the area, I apply the pigment. Look at how rich that pigment is that I'm adding to that space. And if I hadn't have done that first layer of paint with the purples and mixing with the greens and whatever other underpainting colors there were, I wouldn't get the depth that I'm getting from these final layers into the negative space. Definitely going trigger happy with the water sprayer. I don't want hard edges in that background space. And I drag the water across and now the pigment across the bottom to connect the one side of the painting to the other. And it was just, there was something about, I don't know, I just needed that little extra thing in that part of the painting. That was an intuitive decision to do that. creates a little bit of a cast shadow. And popping that tulip shape forward by adding that dark, and then I'm softening it out so it's darkest right next to the flower, and then I'm softening that dark out as I connect out to the edge of the painting. I find that the acrylics, when I'm using this good quality fluid acrylic, I'm using a combination of golden fluid acrylics as well as some Tri-Art, which is a Canadian company. They both have artist quality fluid acrylics that are just lovely. You don't need to use a lot of the pigment to get that rich intensity of color. When you're using a tube acrylic, to make it fluid enough for me to, because I like to work quite wet, I find that you lose that intensity. So there you have it, the finished painting, and I hope you enjoyed to see a little bit of my water media process. I will be putting some water media demonstrations periodically in amongst my oil and cold wax demonstrations. Stay tuned for those, and thank you for joining me in the studio. Till next time.